Welcome up! In this episode we will talk about governments, their various forms and functions, and how they come into place. Coming up. Hello, I'm Understanding Politics, and in this channel I explain political theories and debates to students as well as curious and passionate people, just like you. So if you like my videos, consider subscribing. The word government has a long history, from the Latin gubernare, which means direct rule, and even before from ancient Greek, from the word kybernan, which is the act of piloting a ship. In fact, the government, or executive, is an organ that through its ministers guides the state by offering inputs for laws discussed in parliament, executing them, or regulating and administering different aspects of the life of a society. A thing that may surprise viewers that are not familiar with US politics is that there the word government is rather uncommon. In fact, more often you will hear the expression administration to refer to the president and the cabinet. Let's start by saying that forms of government and forms of state are not the same thing. I will repeat this in other videos, but the form of state concerns how power is concentrated and administered in the society. In other words, it defines the relationship between the political community, the people, and authorities. Nowadays, a state can be democratic or authoritarian. There are, of course, other forms that have been enlisted by different authors other times, but these two basic forms are more than sufficient to explain the essential character of any state. On the other hand, forms of government differentiate in consideration of the relationship that the government itself entertains with the electorate and other organs of the state. Therefore, a government can be parliamentary, presidential, semi-presidential, or directorial. If a government is parliamentary, then the head of government does not coincide with the head of state. And this stems from the idea that a head of government represents a part, often the majority, but not the entirety of the population. On the other hand, the head of state, which can be often a president but also a monarch, represents the state, and while it does not hold much power in practice, acts in accordance to the norms and values of the Constitution. In this system, the government is not elected by citizens but by the parliament, and therefore it represents the majority of forces in parliament. There are also cases of minority governments, but these are often a temporary fix adopted before more stable solutions are found. The head of government chooses the ministers, and if the head of state approves, then the ball is thrown in the yard of the parliament that needs to vote the confidence to the government. While during the life of a government ministers can be replaced and the parliament can vote for their removal, a government falls whenever it loses a vote of confidence, which is whenever Prime Minister does not have the confidence of the parliament. If a government falls, it does not mean that the state will hold new elections automatically. If the parliament has a proposal for a new government, the head of state might decide not to summon new elections. In a parliamentary system, it is quite normal to have governments that last less than an elected parliament. On the other hand, a directorial government is a form of government where the leadership is shared by more than one representative. Nowadays, the only directorial governments worldwide are Switzerland and San Marino. San Marino has a very peculiar structure where two Capitan Regents are elected by the parliament every 6 months. At the same time, they are heads of government and heads of state. As for this last example, in a presidential form of government, the head of government and the head of state are the same person. For this reason, the president is always elected by the electorate, normally in a separate election. In fact, in a parliamentary system, the president is not always elected by the electorate, as in the case of Italy, where the president is elected by a 2/3 majority of the parliament. Of course, when the country has a monarch, nobody needs to be elected. In a presidential form of government, the president is then elected for a term which is from 4 to 5 years, depending on the country. Of course, here the prime example is the United States. A version that stands in between parliamentary and presidential form of government is then the semi-presidential system. Here, the president and the prime minister share the executive power, generating all sorts of opposition or cohabitation between a president and a prime minister of a different political orientation. For this reason, also in this case, the electorate chooses the president in a separate election. Of course, the prime example of this form of government is offered by nowadays France. So to wrap up, if you remember from last video, that appears of course as a suggestion in the top right corner, the government holds executive power. There are four main forms of government: parliamentary, presidential, semi-presidential, and directorial. In theory, at the extremes we have parliamentary and presidential. In the parliamentary system, the government is elected by the parliament, while in the presidential system, the president is elected by the electorate. The head of government and the head of state are the same person in the presidential system, but they are two different individuals in the parliamentary system. The reasoning behind this is that different countries adopted different systems with the objective to balance power and symbols among different institutions. Thanks for watching. As always, all the sources will be linked in the references section of this video description. If you found the video useful, mission accomplished. Minority fix. Temporary fix. Goodness. As a relevant tech Today, the curiosity is that while Italy holds a relevant record in terms of number of governments, it holds also the record for the shortest lived government, along with Portugal, only 12 days.